Hi there, my name is Walter Kane. A few months ago, my own kids decided I was a burden and dumped me in a nursing home, thinking I'd quietly fade away while they took over my life and my home. They didn't realize I had other plans that would turn their little scheme upside down. My son said, "You'll be safer here." But I knew right away safer meant a door that locks from the inside. The reception hall at Silver Pines carried the sterile tang of antiseptic, laced with the faint bite of bleach. Overhead, fluorescent lights hummed in a way that flattened both shadows and hope. Monday, October, Castijo 123. Outside, Portland's rain drummed against the glass, each drop a soft reminder that the world was still moving beyond these walls. Nathan stood beside the counterpen, poised like a weapon. He wore a charcoal suit cut to impress shareholders, not family. Melissa, draped in a camel coat that cost more than my first car, scrolled her phone with the calculated indifference of someone avoiding eye contact. They didn't need to look at me to make this feel official. The intake nurse slid the paperwork across the counter. Full residential care, Nathan said, voice clipped and businesslike, as if he were closing a deal. His words weren't meant for me. They were for the file, for the institution, for the record. I kept silent. Years of running a healthcare company had taught me that in sterile places like this, silence buys you more than protest. My eyes swept the reception area, two security cameras in opposite corners, one by the elevator, the other covering the hallway to the residence rooms. The front door, a heavy magnetic lock, could only be released by a key card. I noted the positions, the angles, the blind spots. Melissa shifted in her chair, pretending to scroll social media. The reflection in her phone's screen betrayed the faintest smirk. A notification popped up her real estate app before she flicked it away. Nathan stepped aside to take a call, his tone dropping into a low murmur. "Once the house sells, everything will settle," he said. There was a pause then. "Yeah, the loan will be cleared." Loan. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face as calm as my pulse would allow. They thought they were just placing me in a facility, but in that moment the truth uncoiled. This wasn't about my well-being. It was about stripping me of control and of everything I owned. A soft voice cut through my thoughts. "Walter," I turned. Standing in the doorway to the administrative office was Eleanor Price, sharp gray suit, eyes still carrying the focus I remembered from years ago. She had been a junior manager back when I was CEO. Our eyes met, and in that brief connection, I saw something flicker, recognition, and maybe opportunity. I gave her the smallest nod. And just like that, I knew the game wasn't over. The first week was reconnaissance. Between October 4th and 8th, I mapped the rhythms of Silver Pine's shift changes, staff rotations who lingered after hours, and which doors clicked open with a single swipe. Eleanor's look from that first day stayed with me. Not warm, not cold, just calculated. It told me she remembered, and she was weighing something. That was enough for now. The common room was my initial listening post. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner, punctuated by the low whir of an old espresso machine. I found Howard there most mornings shuffling a deck of cards he never actually dealt. He was a retired accountant with a habit of talking numbers like other men talk sports. "You ever notice," he said, squinting over his bifocals, "these invoices for laundry? Same month, same dates, billed twice. Happens every quarter." He chuckled, but it wasn't amusement. It was recognition. The kind an auditor gets when he smells a weak ledger. That told me two things: the place had leaks in its finances, and Howard noticed patterns no one else cared about. Both could be useful. In the afternoons, I drifted to the rear garden, a modest square of grass bordered by an aluminum fence. Eleanor was there one evening, checking her phone under the pretense of admiring the roses. "You still prefer numbers over politics?" I asked. Her eyes flicked up, assessing. "Some habits don't change." I reminded her of the time 15 years ago when I'd quietly vouched for her during a departmental audit. "I can do the same for this place," I said, "but I need to know I can trust you." No agreement, no refusal, just a slow nod. That was enough for the moment. By Thursday night, I decided to extend my reach. Carla, the night nurse, was direct and efficient with the kind of no-nonsense gait that made you think twice about wasting her time. I approached her while she was refilling the supply cart. "Would you deliver a note for me, strictly above board, no trouble for you?" I slipped her a sealed envelope, the inside containing a single sheet addressed to George Allen, an old friend and attorney. The request was clear: verify the legal status of my house and dig into Silver Pine's ownership structure. Carla looked at the envelope, then at me. Tips aren't against the rules, she said flatly, taking the small legal gratuity I'd prepared. The exchange was smooth until the door at the end of the hall swung open. A floor manager stepped in, eyes sweeping the corridor. Carla's posture stiffened. Before it could turn into a question, Eleanor appeared, clipboard in hand. Just checking supply inventory, she said. Her tone was even, her gaze cutting through the tension. The manager moved on without a word. Later that night, as I returned to my room, I felt the weight in my pocket, something that hadn't been there before. A folded slip of paper, no signature. The owner wants to sell, urgent. I sat on the bed staring at the note. Pieces were moving faster than I expected. The envelope I'd sent to George last week had done its work. On the morning of October 9th, his voice was on the line before my coffee was even cool. Walter, he said, your son's been busy. Nathan filed a springing power of attorney kicked in after a doctor declared you incapacitated. A springing POA, triggered only by a professional certification. George didn't need to spell it out. The signature belonged to Dr. Fenton, who Nathan and Melissa had clearly convinced or paid to rubber stamp. They used it to list your house for sale, George added. Settlement dates in 3 weeks. I leaned against the window, the morning sun bleaching the edge of my vision. Then the first order of business is voiding it. File for revocation and get me a temporary protective order to restrict their access. You'll get it, George replied. His tone carried the calm of someone who'd been through this kind of fire before. By mid-afternoon, I had another visitor, Eleanor, slipping into the empty family consultation room as if she were checking the thermostat. She placed a single folder on the table. Harold Benton's the owner, she said. The place is bleeding money. He's looking to sell before the banks start breathing down his neck. Inside the folder was a one-page summary: revenues, liabilities, outstanding vendor debts. The numbers told a story of mismanagement and desperation. When I called George again, we spoke the same language we'd used decades ago during merger talks. We set up a special purpose vehicle, he said. Northbridge Care, LLC. Capitalized with your retirement funds plus a bridge loan, 60% debt coverage. Clean quick and keeps your name off the front until we're ready. Simple terms for anyone listening: in an SPV is just a clean bucket you fill with money for one job, buying something without dragging in the rest of your affairs. The day's final act came in the form of a video call request from Nathan. His face filled the screen, Melissa at his side, her smile too bright to be genuine. Dad, Nathan began, good news, we're close to closing on the house. This way your care here stays top-notch. I let the silence sit just long enough. You might want to talk to your lawyer before you lock the door on yourselves. Melissa's smile froze. Nathan's eyes narrowed. I ended the call. Not 10 minutes later, George forwarded a legal notice to their email, citing the revocation of the POA in a pending injunction. The sale was on ice. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor. Harold meets a private investor tomorrow night. One shot, don't miss it. The board was set. My first real piece was in play. Eleanor's last message still sat on my phone. Only one shot. That shot was waiting in a second-floor office above Main Street, Portland. October 16th, 2023. The office smelled of old paper and polished wood, dark paneling, heavy blinds, a setting that tried to whisper stability, but to anyone who knew the signs reeked of financial strain. Harold Benton rose from behind a walnut desk, his handshake warm, but slightly damp. Mr. Allen, he said to George, who carried the paperwork in a slim leather folder. And your advisor? I smiled faintly. Just here to listen. George took the lead. Northbridge Care, LLC is prepared to make a clean, all-cash offer for Silver Pines. Lower than market, yes, but funds will be in escrow within 30 days. No bank financing delays, no appraisal contingencies. Harold kept his jaw steady, but his fingers drummed once on the desk. He knew the banks were circling. One wrong quarter, and they'd take the keys without asking. I flipped through Eleanor's latest printouts. Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement schedules, vendor contracts with suppliers, and 2 irregularities buried in the details enough to stall any future buyer who did deep due diligence. I let the page sit where Harold could see the headings. Looks like you've got some renewal deadlines in 60 days, I said casually. Any buyer will find them. They'll take their time, and your lender won't wait. The silence stretched. Then Harold leaned back, the false confidence in his eyes starting to fade. George slid the top document across the desk. Letter of intent. Includes a no-shop clause for 14 days. We'll add an NDA and one small operational request. Certain visitors are granted special access until close. Harold's pen hovered for only a second before scratching his signature. His relief was almost visible, like a man who'd been holding his breath too long. He didn't know the advisor in front of him was the same Walter Kane his buyers had conveniently abandoned in this very facility. That would come later. As we stepped into the hall, George buttoned his coat and spoke in the same tone he'd used after closing boardroom takeovers decades ago. Now he said quietly, "We just wait and hit when it matters." The lock was mine. The door was about to swing open. The week after the letter of intent was signed, moved with quiet precision. By October 29th, the wires had cleared. Northbridge Care LLC's escrow transfer hit, the final closing documents were executed, and with one understated signature, Silver Pines changed hands. On paper, it was just another acquisition. In reality, the ground beneath certain people's feet had shifted for good. I now owned the very building my so-called family had left me in. George handled the legal filings with the same measured tone he'd used in hostile takeovers decades ago. The transfer of ownership packet slid through the county clerk's office without a hiccup. At the same time, he lodged a temporary protective order request, one crafted with surgical precision. Not a ban on visits, just a requirement any entry must be specifically approved by the owner. Eleanor was already moving. She briefed the front desk, handed over the printed special visitor authorization list, and highlighted two names, Nathan Kane and Melissa Kane. Her voice was calm, but every word was an iron gate. No entry without Walter Kane's direct consent. That afternoon, George dropped a manila envelope on my table. Inside, a civil complaint targeting misappropriation of family assets and an injunction freezing their joint accounts pending review. We didn't need a courtroom win, yet just enough legal weight to keep my holdings insulated from their reach. 3 days later, Nathan and Melissa walked into Silver Pines as if the place still ran on their timetable. At the reception desk, Linda, our new shift lead, smiled politely, but didn't move from her chair. "Mr. and Mrs. Kane," she said, "per facility policy, only visitors on the special authorization list may proceed. You're not currently listed. If Mr. Kane approves, we'll be happy to arrange a time." Melissa blinked. "Mr. Kane. We're his." But before she could finish, I stepped into the lobby, the owner's file tucked under my arm. My voice was even my expression unreadable. "Hello," I said. "We need to talk about visiting hours." Their confidence faltered, not shattered yet, but the balance had shifted. They hadn't realized until this moment that the rules were no longer theirs to set. The door to my office clicked shut behind us. The game board had just been flipped, and the next move was mine. The first week of November began without theatrics. I'd asked Eleanor to invite Nathan and Melissa to meet me in the small gallery off the main hall. The invitation carried no hint of conflict, just enough formality to make them show up on time. The room smelled faintly of cedar polish. A heavy walnut table sat between us, bathed in the muted glow from the wall sconces. Through the open archway, I could sense staff members and a few residents lingering, pretending to admire the framed landscapes, while really straining to hear. George sat at my right, his leather folio open pen poised. Eleanor leaned against the sideboard, arms crossed watchful. Nathan tried to start light. "Dad, we're glad you called us in. Maybe we can..." I set the ownership file on the table with a deliberate thud. The Silver Pines deed lay on top, my name in bold ink. Beneath it, the temporary protective order and the special visitor authorization policy. This, I said, tapping the first page, is the transfer document. As of last week, I own this facility, which means entry here happens under my rules. Melissa's smile twitched. "We just want to visit." "You can't keep family." "I'm not keeping anyone out." I cut in. "I'm enforcing a process. You request, I decide." George slid a second envelope toward them. "Two options," he said evenly. "Sign the withdrawal agreement, full release of any claim to Mr. Kane's assets, rescind the house sale, and walk away with no further action. Or," he opened the other file, "we proceed with the financial exploitation case. Your accounts remain frozen, and the state investigates the rest." Melissa's tone softened into a rehearsed plea. "Dad, we only wanted what's best for you." I met her eyes steady as stone. If your idea of best was locking me away to strip my assets, then yes, I'm safer now than I've been in years. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. Nathan's posture sagged. Melissa looked down. They understood the deal was real and the leverage was all mine. I rose, collecting the deed and leaving the documents on the table. You have until Friday. Stepping into the hallway, the late afternoon sun cut through the glass, casting long bands of gold across the floor. Eleanor passed me in the opposite direction, tilting her head with a small smile. Good afternoon, Chairman. I returned it, a slow, unforced smile, the first one I'd made on my own terms in a long time.